Today at the National Press Club, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. As he prepares for an upcoming election campaign, Mr Albanese will make his first Press Club address of the year, outlining his pitch to voters. The Prime Minister with today's National Press Club address.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the National Press Club and the Westpac Address, where we are meeting on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, Canberra. My name is Laura Tingle. I'm the club's president. Before I introduce the Prime Minister, could I ask your indulgence for us all to stop and remember Ken Randall today? Ken died earlier this month at the venerable age of 88. A journalist in the Canberra Press Gallery for decades, the National Press Club owes an extraordinary debt to Ken for an unmatched commitment to making this institution the vital part of our national debate that it has become. He saw the club through good times, but particularly through bad and perilous ones, and his contribution and wise counsel led to him being made the club's patron in his latter years. There will be a memorial service for Ken here at the club next Thursday morning at 11 a.m, and of course you're all most welcome to attend. An address by the Prime Minister here at the National Press Club has come to be seen as the traditional way the political year begins. In this, an election year, it seems the starters' guns have already been fired. But we look forward to the club once again being an important platform from which our political leaders can speak to hundreds of thousands of Australian voters and face questions from the journalists who cover politics every day of the year. As has been the case for the almost 3 years he has held the job, there is a standing invitation to the Leader of the Opposition to address the club. Without further ado, though, could I please ask you to join me in welcoming the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, to address us today.
Well, thank you very much, Laura, and can I join in paying my respects to the memory of Ken Randall and offer my sincere condolences to his family and his many, many friends, including the role that he played here at the National Press Club was, of course, central for such a long period of time. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge all my many colleagues who have joined me here today, and I thank them for that. Everywhere we've been this summer, the work of building Australia's future is underway. A $7.2 billion investment to boost productivity and make the Bruce Highway safer, upgrading key roads in Western Sydney and vital ports in Western Australia, connecting communities with economic opportunity, building new homes for Australians in our cities and regions, from Cairns and Karratha to Heidelberg and Hobart, finishing the NBN with fibre, not copper, delivering high-speed access and keeping it in public hands. Now, it's no secret that I'm an infrastructure nerd. Infrastructure matters to me because I've seen the difference that it can make to people, to communities, to our regions, to our economy, to our national way of life. However, I know that building Australia's future is about more than homes and roads and ports and broadband, more than bricks and mortar. Building Australia's future is about all of us, every one of us in every part of our country. Tradies and farmers, small business owners, teachers and nurses. Building Australia's future is about your future because it's your effort and sacrifice and aspiration that powers our economy and nourishes our society. And that effort should bring you fair reward. The hard work you do enhances and shapes our country, and it should add up to a better life for you and your family. That's why building Australia's future means building better Medicare, like the 87 new urgent care clinics that we've opened right around the country. Clinics that have already helped more than 1 million Australians see a doctor when they've needed it and do it just with their Medicare card, not a credit card. And in order to keep growing our economy and creating prosperity, building Australia's future is about what we sell to our region and the world. Manufacturing workers, turning resources the world needs into products the world wants through our plan for a future made in Australia. Aluminium workers in Tomago, Gladstone, Portland and Bell Bay, gaining new security because we're connecting them to cleaner and cheaper energy. Farmers and fishers and producers exporting world-class beef and barley and wine and seafood to China again because we have stabilised our relationship. And building Australia's future is about training Australians for that future. Free TAFE has given 600,000 Australians the chance to learn new skills for new jobs. Free TAFE has changed lives, and we want to expand on this success because we recognise the next generation of tradies, the people we're counting on to build the new homes we need, are under significant financial pressure. Right now, a first-year carpentry apprentice earns about 2/3 of the minimum wage. Some apprentices earn even less. That's before you buy things like tools, safety gear, clothing and boots. Many apprentices have said they could earn more stacking shelves at the supermarket, and too many leave training because they simply can't afford to stay. Our government wants to encourage more Australians to learn a trade and stay in construction. That's why we're going to provide more support for tradies while they're training. Today I announced we will be raising the allowance paid to apprentices who are living away from home. The first time this payment has been increased in over 2 decades. And in occupations essential for residential construction, jobs like bricklayers, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, we will be providing eligible apprenticeships up to $10,000 through our new Housing Construction Apprenticeship program. 5 payments of $2,000 each on top of their wages. This means that apprentices in residential construction will now get the same training incentives as we've already provided for those in the energy sector. More new homes, more new energy, and more support for the tradies who will build both. My colleagues and I know that there is more that we have to do to keep building an economy that works for people, not the other way around. To bring more good jobs and stronger Medicare and new housing and better education to suburbs and communities that have been overlooked for too long. To help more Australians make up the ground they've lost over years of global uncertainty and a wasted decade of Liberal neglect. Cleaning up the mess the Liberals and Nats left behind will be more than 3 years' work in ordinary times, let alone during the global storm that we have faced. Like every other advanced economy, Australia has had to deal with global inflation and its consequences. Here in Australia, inflation peaked lower and later than most. The United States, the UK and Canada all endured higher rates of inflation, higher interest rates, rising unemployment and slower job creation. When we came to government, inflation was rising and wages were falling. We've turned both around. Inflation had a 6 in front of it and was rising. Now it has a 2 in front of it. Back in the Reserve Bank target band for the first time since 2021. Inflation is down, wages are up, and 1.1 million new jobs have been created. Under our government, Australia has maintained a faster rate of employment growth than any G7 nation, bar none. Faster than Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK and the United States. And stronger economic growth than any G7 country, bar the United States. This is because, from the outset, we made a conscious choice to get inflation down without treating people as expendable. And it was a choice. Our opponents made it clear they would have made a different one. They said, loudly and often, we should have cut everything, frozen investment, turned our backs on people and turned the whole place off at the wall. But that's not the Australian way, and it's certainly not the Australian Labor way. When Australians are making sacrifices, we refuse to sacrifice their jobs and wages, their Medicare and childcare. And we refuse to give up on shaping the future. Because even when you're navigating rough seas, you have to keep your eyes on the horizon. And while my colleagues and I are encouraged by the progress Australia has made and confident that the worst is behind us, we recognise that things are still hard for people. I can promise every Australian this: we will keep working every day to get your costs down, to get your wages up, and to keep inflation where it should be. Delivering 2 consecutive budget surpluses for the first time in nearly 2 decades has helped put that downward pressure on inflation. These back-to-back budget surpluses are a credit to the hard work of Jim Chalmers and Katie Gallagher. They are a measure of our responsible economic management. And so is the fact that annual real wages growth is back 4 quarters in a row. So is the fact that the gender pay gap is at an all-time low. So is the fact that bulk billing is on the way up. Because when it comes to the economy and the budget, a government's responsibility goes beyond making savings and cutting waste. Responsible economic management is about boosting wages and job security, funding the services that families count on. And responsible economic management is about meeting your responsibility to the future. Investing in the energy and industry and infrastructure and trade and technology that will power our growth in the years ahead. And investing in Australians, people's skills and education, housing and healthcare, the next generation of secure, well-paid jobs in every part of our country. In all this, the contrast between us and our opponents is night and day. We're strengthening Medicare, the Liberals want to cut it. We're growing wages, they want to cut them back and keep them low. We're looking after people's jobs, the Liberals say we should sacrifice them. We're building new energy to bring bills down now. Their nuclear fantasy means pressing the pause button for 20 years and then funding the most expensive form of new energy on the planet. We're backing a future made in Australia. The Liberals are happy to send jobs offshore, like they did with the car industry. They dismissed our plan to put nurses back into aged care and lift the pay of those who deliver dignity to our older Australians. And while we are investing in education, they oppose it at every turn. The Liberals say reducing student debt by 20% is unfair. Their deputy leader says that 600,000 Australians who've been given a chance to learn new skills through free TAFE don't value that opportunity because they didn't pay for it. They mock the 15% pay rise we're delivering for early educators, and they stand against our plans to build new childcare centres and make childcare more affordable for families. Two weeks ago, the Leader of the Opposition published a list of his 12 priorities for government. Education and skills didn't even rate a mention. For Labor, nothing is more important to building Australia's future than education. Early education, TAFE and apprenticeships, university, and of course, schools. 14 years ago, in his landmark report, David Gonski outlined a national schooling resource standard, a level of funding calculated per student designed to ensure no Australian child would be left behind. As a nation, we've never reached that level for public schools. We've never met that standard that was outlined so clearly. Today, we take a big step forward to making it happen. Today, I announce we have secured new schools funding agreements with South Australia and with Victoria. They join the ACT, Northern Territory, Tasmania and Western Australia, meaning 6 of the states and territories are now signed up to Better and Fairer Schools to meet the standards in education that Australian children deserve. And I do want to take this opportunity to thank Premier Malinauskas and Premier Allen for their cooperation. I also want to thank Premier Crisafulli and Premier Minns for their constructive engagement, and it will be ongoing. Today is about a principle that has driven me my whole life. No one held back and no one left behind. Making sure that every child in government schools gets the support They need to thrive. Because this agreement is not about dividing up the same amount of dollars in a different way. Instead, both levels of government are stepping up our commitment to schools over the decade. Importantly, this new agreement means accounting practices like capital depreciation can no longer be counted as education investment. Instead, every dollar of funding will go into helping children learn. This will mean more money than ever for public schools, but it's not a blank cheque. Our new funding is for real reform and it will deliver real results, because what we are offering every state and territory is new Commonwealth investment in the fundamentals that matter so much to students and matter so much to parents. The methods and resources at work that make the biggest difference. Evidence-based instruction, phonics and numeracy testing in Year 1, identifying students who need that extra help early on, not waiting until they've fallen behind. Classroom assistance and catch-up tutoring for small groups and one-on-one. More opportunities for students who need an extra challenge. More support for every teacher and more individual attention for every child. This is about every parent knowing that their child can get the best start in life at their local school. Education opens up those doors of opportunity and it widens them. It changes lives. A great education is what every parent wants for their child. It's what every Australian student deserves. And it's what our government is determined to deliver. Building Australia's future through every stage of education will be a defining priority of a re-elected Labor government. And it is a defining point of difference between us and our opponents, as is helping with the cost of living. Over the past 3 years, the Liberals and Nationals have opposed every single measure we have delivered to help people under pressure. Peter Dutton sneers at them as sugar hits. The Liberals talk about waste. This is the party that gave billions of dollars in JobKeeper payments to companies that were making record profits. They wasted hundreds of millions of dollars on commuter car parks that weren't even anywhere near a train station. Something to keep in mind next time you hear them talk about getting back on track. The Liberals voted to make medicine more expensive and harder to get. They opposed 2 years of energy bill relief for families and small business. And they promised to fight our tax cuts for every Australian before they even saw them. Now, after all this, the Liberals want every taxpayer to pick up the bill for long business lunches, trips to the movies, golf days and karaoke nights. And they don't even have the decency to tell taxpayers how much this will cost them. All through the past 3 years, the Liberals have openly sought to make Australians worse off here and now, and they have publicly and repeatedly committed to sweeping cuts that will leave Australians worse off in the future. When Peter Dutton talks about economic surgery, he means cutting wages off at the knees and putting Medicare on life support. The Liberals are prescribing a lethal dose of cuts to all the help that we have provided families with their cost of living, and to all the investments we are making in jobs and communities through a future made in Australia. Dutton's economic surgery won't be done with a scalpel, it will be carried out with an axe, hacking away at jobs and wages and Medicare, childcare and housing. And let's be clear, when it comes to paying for their nuclear reactors, all these Liberal cuts won't even touch the sides. All that money they want ripped out of Medicare and childcare and TAFE. All those new jobs and opportunities in manufacturing and technology forsaken. All those homes and childcare places and doctor's appointments taken away every year for 7 nuclear reactors that won't be ready until sometime in the 2040s. A scheme that costs way too much, takes way too long, and will push up power bills while dragging down economic growth. That's based on the Liberals' own numbers. The modelling they commissioned forecasts the Australian economy using 40% less energy in the future. They're banking on the closure of heavy industry and manufacturing. They're counting on mass job losses, just like when they drove the car industry out of Australia. Nuclear power means lower wages in a smaller economy with less energy that costs more. That's the choice Liberals have made. And it means the choice facing Australians is crystal clear. There is Labor, strengthening Medicare, investing in education, building Australia's future. Or there is Peter Dutton, his nuclear reactors and cuts to everything else to pay for them. This is the 10th time I've spoken at the National Press Club as leader of the Australian Labor Party. I focus today on the choice that Australia is facing this year, the challenges we've overcome, the opportunities ahead, as well as the risks. Because I've always seen this as the place where you come to make your case, to explain what your plan means for people and to have it tested by the national media. That's what I did this time last year, when I stood here to announce we were changing the tax plan that we inherited from the Morrison government to make it better and to make it fairer, to deliver a tax cut for all 13.6 million taxpayers, not just some, to make sure that part-time workers, young people, women and low and middle income earners didn't miss out, to help Australians earn more and keep more of what they earn. It wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't universally welcomed by members of the press here, I recall, in the following couple of days. But it was absolutely the right decision, and it was made for the right reasons. Tomorrow marks the one-year anniversary of that announcement and the anniversary of the opposition leader demanding an election to stop our tax cuts going ahead. When you think about that moment, our government acting to help Australians under pressure, making a tough and difficult decision, and the Liberals and Nats trying to stop it at all costs. That sums up so much of the last 3 years, and it speaks volumes for the choice Australians have to make about the next 3 years. Because this year's election is not a matter of competing plans striving for the same outcome. It's not two roads that ultimately lead to the same destination. This election is a choice between two fundamentally different approaches and vastly different agendas, two completely different visions for our nation, for our economy, for our people, and our place in the world. It's a choice between Labor's plan to help Australians under pressure and reward their hard work, against the Liberals' promise to cut what is helping and abandon people who are hurting. It's a choice between our determination and optimism or their fear and negativity. It's Labor's belief in the opportunities this decade holds and our plans for Australians to seize them against the Liberals' view that Australia can't compete and we shouldn't try. It's Labor's focus on helping people earn more and keep more of what they earn against the Liberals' plan to make Australians work longer for less. The difference, this contrast, means that when the time comes for Australians to cast their vote, people can know with absolute certainty that there are things that only Labor can offer, things only a Labor government will do, because only Labor has a plan to keep the economy growing in the face of global uncertainty. Only Labor will keep wages up and inflation down. Only Labor will not just defend Medicare, but grow it and strengthen it for all. Only Labor will invest in your child's education, from the first day at childcare right through to their last day of school and beyond. Only Labor will help you with your apprenticeship, cut your student debt by 20% and lock in free TAFE nationwide. Only Labor will build the new homes we need and build the clean energy to cut our emissions and make things here in Australia. Meanwhile, the Liberals are up front. It's spelled out behind them nearly every time they stand up. They want to take Australia back to aged care in crisis. back to bulk billing and freefall, back to childcare being out of reach, back to an economic plan that boasted about shutting manufacturing down, back to keeping wages low, back to Australia being isolated on the world stage and adrift in the Pacific, back to women's economic equality being treated as a curiosity, not as a priority, back to chaos and internal conflict. That's why this year's election, your choice has never been more clear. And the consequences of your choice for your job, your wage, your child's education, your healthcare and your environment have never been more immediate. There's a reason my opponent hasn't fronted up here his whole time as opposition leader. He doesn't like questions because he doesn't have any real answers. He's obsessed with talking Australia down to try and build himself up. But this is not a time for wrecking, for cutting, for thinking small, aiming low and looking back. This is a time for building, for looking after people and looking to the future, for a Labor government investing in the hard work and aspiration of all Australians. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. A couple of observations from your speech. You talked about trying to rebuild during a period of global uncertainty, and you marked the anniversary tomorrow of your tax cut announcement here at the Press Club. We've got the ultimate global uncertainty going on at the moment in the White House. A lot of executive orders have been coming out of there this week. And indications from President Trump that he's looking at slashing tax rates. He's already walked away from the OECD agreement amongst major economies on tax. I just wonder, can you realistically go to another term without actually acknowledging that you're going to have to do some sort of tax reform to fund all the sorts of things that you would like to see done for the Australian people?
Well, importantly, I'd make a couple of points. One is we managed to deliver not one but two budget surpluses. Pretty important. The first time that's happened in 20 years. We did that by making sure that our fiscal policy was responsible, by making difficult decisions. We also made sure when we did the tax cuts that we kept the same amount, basically $107 billion. The Morrison tax cuts were worth $106. We did that understanding that we had to make a difficult decision effectively. We had to take some off the top end in order to make sure that people weren't left behind. That was a tough decision that we made. That was an important decision that we made as well. We will, of course, continue to examine responsible economic management. We've been through MyEFA and we're going through budget preparations now as we speak for this budget. The ERC met yesterday and we continue to engage in those issues. So over the coming weeks and months, obviously, we'll outline a range of policies that we'll take to the election. Ours will be costed, as the policies that I announced when I was the opposition leader were costed, whether it was the National Reconstruction Fund or our Cheaper Childcare Plan or our Housing Australia Future Fund, our Rewiring the Nation policy in a day when opposition had costed policies. The only costing that we've seen from the coalition is the sort of flimsy costing that took place on the nuclear plan, and we know that that depends on 40% less energy use than was assessed by the Australian Energy Market Operator.
Michelle Grattan has a question.
Michelle Grattan from The Conversation. Prime Minister, what's the biggest lesson about governing that you've learnt personally during your first term that you would take to a second term?
Good question. I think the biggest thing is that things will come at you that you don't expect and you have to deal with them. I don't think when I stood here in 2022 before the election that if someone had stood up and said there'd be a land war still going in Europe in 2025, people would have shaken their head and said that was absurd as a proposition. We thought we'd move beyond that. Now that had, along with the long tail of COVID, an impact on global inflation that was not anticipated at that time more than 3 years ago. So you have to deal with things as they are rather than as you want them to be. You deal with them whilst always keeping your eye on that horizon.
Ashley Raper.
Ashley Raper, Network 10. Prime Minister, throughout your political career, you've been popular. People have thought you're a genuine, relatable, good bloke. You've been fondly known as DJ Albo. But in the polls as Prime Minister, your popularity has plummeted. Why do you think your likeability hasn't translated or transferred to you as Prime Minister?
Well, I'm not a commentator. I'll leave the commentating to others. What I can say is that every single day I've been focused on leading a government that implements the values that I've had my whole life, making sure that people aren't left behind. That's why we've done things like the single parenting payment changes, the 45% increase in rental assistance, the fee-free TAFE to make a difference in people's lives. That's why today's announcement about schools funding is so important as well. I passionately believe that every child deserves the best opportunity to be the best that they can. And I know that proper funding of education, not just about dollars either, but about things like literacy and numeracy and that testing, phonics. At the moment, you wait under NAPLAN until a child is 8 before they're tested. Jason Clare has been very, very strong about the need to test and examine in year 1 so that it's not too late by the time a child gets to the age of 8. They're the things that have driven me my whole life. But I also understand aspiration. My life is one of aspiration. It's part of the Labor agenda as well, that people can make a better life for themselves. And that's why seizing the opportunities of new industries and the changes in the global economy are so important for me. I really think that this decade will determine what Australia looks like and how successful we are up to 2050. We need to get it right now, or else we'll fall behind while the rest of the world moves past us.
Thank you.
Phil Curry.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, Mr Albanese. Just back to sort of Laura's question. Before that, you mentioned the tax cuts, broken promise you made, forced by circumstance. Another promise you gave before the last election was not to change the tax treatment of super. You did announce that measure, which is still trying to get through the Senate on the $3 million plus accounts. But going forward, will there be any more changes to super? And if there are, will we know about them before the election, or are we in for more surprises after the election?
It's one of the big differences between us and our opponents. We understand how important superannuation is. Superannuation is about people's retirement incomes. Now, we opposed the change that the former government did during COVID that they allowed. We moved amendments. We didn't allow the perfect to be the good. So we were constructive and said, we won't knock over all of the stimulus if you include this. But the decision to allow people to reach into their super and in many cases reduce their balances to zero will have an impact not just on people's retirement incomes but also on our national economy as well. That was a bad decision, just like everyone used to agree that rating your super for housing was a bad decision as well. So we will support superannuation. I noticed that there's a campaign as well from within the coalition to reduce super back to single digits, away from 12. Now, like the nuclear plan, like a whole range of other things, Peter Dutton has a history of giving in to what the rump on his backbench have to say in terms of those elements. And if they were in government, I would expect changes to superannuation which undermine it. If we're in government, we'll continue to be supporters of superannuation because of what it does for retirement incomes, but what it also presents as a national asset to be able to invest in the national interest.
Jane Norman.
Hello, Prime Minister. Thank you for addressing the club today. I'm sure you've seen, but in the SMH and the Age today, there's a published poll which suggests that public support for holding Australia Day on the 26th of January has increased in recent years from about 47% support in 2023 to about 61% today. I'm just wondering what you believe might be behind this shift in sentiment that the poll has detected, and whether in any way you think it might be linked to the failure of the Voice referendum.
Now, well, this weekend we'll celebrate Australia Day, and that's a wonderful thing. Australians will gather at the beach, barbies, they'll gather around the country and gather at their family backyards. And it's an opportunity every year as well. We have to think and not take for granted what we are as a nation, what we've built here. I firmly believe it's a celebration of why we are the best country on earth. But how do we ensure that we're even better in the future? And there's nowhere better to be on Australia Day than at citizenship ceremonies. I've said I hope Peter Dutton turns up, as I did, as the opposition leader, to the national celebration here in Canberra, in our national capital, this weekend. The Australia Day Awards tomorrow night are an inspiration every year. And the citizenship ceremony, seeing the joy on people pledging their allegiance to our country, is something that lifts me up every year. And the other thing that happens at Australia Day is there is a focus on the fullness and richness of our history, including the fact that we all share this continent with the oldest continuous culture on earth, and what a privilege it is. So the first thing I'll do Sunday morning is a private ceremony that happens every year here with the Prime Minister of the day and the Governor-General, with Indigenous leaders on the banks of Lake Burley-Griffin. And it's a wonderful thing. And every year, certainly my local council and the Inner West Council, when it used to be 3 of them, all are very respectful and acknowledging of the full history, acknowledging as well that it's a hurtful day, a difficult day for many First Nations people, but it's one in which we can celebrate what we are today, whether it be our great history going back 65,000 years, or whether it is the arrival of Europeans here, or whether it be the great multicultural nation we've built, particularly since the end of the Second World War.
Cameron Redden.
Prime Minister, thanks very much. Cameron Redden from Sky News. The Israeli government continues to accuse your government of campaigning against it, even contributing to anti-Semitism in Australia. You may be aware of Israeli media reports of a heated conversation between the Foreign Minister and her counterpart last month. There's also a petition online today with 10,000 signatures asking for you to prevent the Foreign Minister from going to the commemoration event in Auschwitz next week. My question is, what do you say to members of the Australian Jewish community who do not believe that the Foreign Minister is the best person to represent Australia on that trip next week?
Foreign Minister Penny Wong is someone who understands racism and discrimination. And anyone who knows Penny Wong and her life story understands that. Penny Wong is going, as is appropriate, as our Foreign Minister, together with our Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, and the Special Envoy on Anti-Semitism, Gillian Siegel, they will be Australia's representatives. For the 75th anniversary, the President of the Senate was the person who went and represented Australia. That was a choice of the former government.
Your message to Jewish Australians, though, who don't believe that she is the best person to go?
Penny Wong is our Foreign Minister. She has stood up against anti-Semitism at each and every opportunity and will always continue to do so. She's someone for whom a core belief in the dignity of every human being is just a part of her character, as much as any person I have met in my entire life.
Anna Henderson.
Thank you. Anna Henderson, SBS World News. Thank you for your address. Bob Hawke introduced Medicare, and with Paul Keating, he floated the dollar. Julia Gillard began the NBN and introduced the NDIS, and Gonski, Kevin Rudd helped Australia avoid recession in the global financial crisis. So what is the big legacy of this term of government for you? What is the headline achievement that the true believers will be looking back on with pride in 20 years?
Keeping us out of recession, 1.1 million jobs, getting inflation from a 6 to a 2, making sure that people's living standards are looked after, that they're not left behind, completing the NBN, finishing Gonski. It's taken a long time, but it was on pause and went backwards when the former government came in and ripped tens of billions of dollars out of education, turning the decline in Medicare around, and importantly, moving towards, just as Labor governments have moved and created, Medicare, universal provision of superannuation. We're taking the steps, and I announced in December, for universal provision of childcare. This will transform the way that Australia functions, will transform opportunity, and will make sure that every young Australian gets the best start in life.
Charles Croucher.
Thank you, PM. Charles Croucher from the Nine Network. Before the Queensland election, David Crisafulli categorically ruled out leading a minority government. You've previously ruled out a formal agreement with the Greens, but would you lead a minority government if that's what the Australian people deliver? And do you believe your experience with the last minority government actually helps you in that circumstance?
Well, we won't be entering into any coalitions. The only coalition that exists is the Liberal Party and the National Party, and quite often it's the Liberal Party, National Party and the Greens when it comes to the Senate, combining to block and delay in what I call the no-alition. They're saying no to all the housing reforms, for example, saying no and delaying them, saying no at the moment to issues like superannuation for fairer treatment of superannuation at the very high end. So my government intends to be a majority government. That's what we're working towards. And I said it before, the last election, and indeed in 2013 when I became Deputy Prime Minister, we refused to do arrangements. We just continued to govern on the floor of the Parliament. I'm someone who, though, has always given respect across the board. My door's open to Liberals, Nationals, to a range of people who crossbenchers want to see me. I think that's important as well. But as far as agreements are done, the only coalition sits on the other side.
Mark Riley.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Mark Riley from the Seven Network. Almost every day, if not every day, your opponent, Mr Dutton, calls you a weak leader. In footy terms, he says you're too soft. I'm just wondering if you think you need to be tougher to take on a second term and how you might do that.
I'll tell you what weakness is. Weakness is not having the guts to come to the National Press Club. Weakness is holding one press conference at 1:45 before question time begins at 2 over the last 6 months and not facing the Parliament House press gallery. Weakness is just saying no to everything before you even see the detail. What's tough is coming here, fronting up, as I did last year, saying that we have changed our mind on tax cuts. Fessing up, making it very clear, it wasn't what we said we would do, but it's the right thing to do. And you'd recall your reports at the time were not glowing of that decision, with respect. We were right to do so. It's the toughest thing I've done this term. It's absolutely the right thing to do. Some people, I not only did it, I brought the team with us as well. Toughness is also about how you lead. You know, we did, Bill Shorten resigned this week. We replaced Bill. We've had the swearing-in ceremony on Monday. My government's 50% equal representation now in the Cabinet, with the exception of myself as PM. We're still waiting, I think, unless something's happened this morning. I can't even make a decision about who his Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs is, who the spokespeople are. When our mate from Queensland hit the fence and resigned, and when Julie and Lisa left, these vacancies have stayed vacant forever because he can't even stand up to people in his own party room. That's not leadership. I lead a team. I lead a team in a way that's collegiate, that brings people with me. That's why last year, make no apologies for the fact that we brought the entire caucus together to ensure that they made the decision as well. They owned it and would go out there and advocate for the change we made on tax. We'll continue to make difficult decisions in the national interest, even if at times there's a personal cost to it, because I'm determined to lead a government that changes the country for the better.
Jade Galeberger from News Corp. Prime Minister, thank you for your speech. Just back on Australia Day, in today's papers you have said Australia Day is an opportunity to celebrate everything we have built together, yet companies are scrapping all references to our National Day. Do you support calls to boycott pubs and businesses that don't support Australia Day, and should venues impose public holiday surcharges?
Look, we're, you know, I sometimes think Peter Dutton every year has a fight with an imaginary friend over something that most Australians are just getting on with Australia Day. And one of the things that Australia Day celebrates is the fact that we're not a Soviet-style command system. You know, like, just chill out. Get on with life. You know, the debates over which company has thongs in it. Last year it was, you know, Woolworths, boycotting Woolworths, Australia's largest employer. Did I support that? No, I didn't support that. I support Australia Day. I'll be celebrating Australia Day. I'll be participating at the national events here. I hope that Peter Dutton joins me in a bipartisan show of support for our National Day in our national capital.
David Crowe.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Prime Minister, for your speech. Many topics to ask you about, but I think I'll follow up on Mark Riley's question. It's true that Peter Dutton hasn't appeared here at the National Press Club. I can say as a former director of the club, he has that standing invitation, and it's been there for some time. Clearly, one way in which to get the opposition leader and yourself to take more questions is to hold a debate. Do you commit to having 3 debates ahead of the election, and do you commit to having one of those debates here at the National Press Club?
I'm happy to commit to having debates. My campaign director is here, Paul Erickson, and he's responsible for all of those negotiations, and I hope he does the right thing and delivers. I certainly think this is an appropriate venue for a national debate here, because what it does is it allows journalists from across the spectrum, as we've had here today, from the full spectrum of diversity of media to be able to ask questions.
So here and 3?
I leave it up to Paul Erickson to finalise that, but certainly I would applaud his diligence and skills if that is the outcome.
Of course, the first debate ever was conducted here in 1984, so we've got history. Jeff Chambers.
Yeah, Jeff Chambers from The Australian. Prime Minister, before the last...
I'll even offer to give Peter Dutton a lift down from Parliament House in case he can't find it.
Before the last election, you spoke about restoring integrity and responsibility to politics. You told Australians, if I get something wrong, I'll own up to it, and that you would unite the country and bring people together. On 3 issues, your government's leadership in response to anti-Semitism, Labor's promise to reduce power prices by $275 by 2025 this year, and your decision to proceed with the Indigenous voice referendum despite expectations it would fail amid a cost of living crisis. Will you own up to getting these issues wrong or acknowledge that mistakes were made?
I'll go in reverse order. I stood here and every time I stood up it wasn't on election night, every time I stood up and gave a major speech, and I gave 10 vision statements. I came to the National Press Club on multiple occasions. I'd begin by reaffirming the commitment that Labor had to Indigenous recognition in our Constitution. And that was something I note that Scott Morrison promised to do in the lead up to the 2019 election as well. People from both sides had said that. And going back to John Howard promised Indigenous recognition in our Constitution. So that was something that had been around for a very long period of time. So I reject
Was the timing wrong?
I reject the assertion that you make. And indeed, The Australian, your publication, had a proud history of campaigning and publishing people like Noel Pearson over a long period of time, advocating for Indigenous recognition in our Constitution, in our nation's birth certificate. On the issue of energy, we, like the rest of the world, got hit with a global energy crisis that led to, in some countries, far higher increases. You had double-digit inflation in countries like the UK, in parts of Europe, driven by the impact on energy prices that are linked globally as well. And so we were affected by that. On anti-Semitism, we have on October the 8th, October 8 at 9 a.m, I was on the Insiders program. I condemned the action unequivocally. I said then that Israel had a right to defend itself. The day after, I opposed the Opera House demonstrations taking place and called for them to not occur. We've established a range of legislation, including strengthening legislation about hate symbols and Nazi symbols, outlawed for the first time ever. The coalition, I've been around a while, and I know who was trying to get rid of 18C because I was campaigning with Peter Wertheim and members of the Jewish community against Peter Dutton and others who were trying to get rid of and weaken our hate laws in this country. That was what was going on over the period of the former government, and it was defeated. I've established the first envoy on anti-Semitism. We've increased funding, not once but twice, for security issues and agreed to every request which has been made. And indeed, there are substantial arrests taking place, and we've supported the police and national security agencies through Operation Adelaide and the state police investigations that have been established to undertake arrests which are out there. The other thing that we have done, at each and every opportunity is to look for social cohesion, not to look for difference, not to look for division, and not to look to make partisan points, but to act in a way that's responsible, that lowers the temperature of debate, just as the Director General of ASIO, Mike Burgess, has so clearly pointed out is in our national interest.
Thank you.
Kat Wong.
Thank you for your address, Mr Prime Minister. Labor has been historically the major party of choice for the vulnerable, working class people, LGBTQ communities, people of colour, people with disabilities. But a lot of these groups have become increasingly disillusioned following the census debacle, cuts to immigration, attempts to rein in or measures to rein in the NDIS. Many think that you have forgotten them for those who appear to be more towards the political centre. Are you taking your voter base for granted?
Not at all. We're acting in a way that is certainly in the national interest and to make sure people aren't left behind. I tell you what will undermine the NDIS is it being unsustainable, is people ripping off the system, not people with disabilities, unscrupulous people taking advantage of the circumstances to essentially gain income through the system by manipulating it. We have, importantly, when you think about this, the NDIS, our objective has been to work with the states on reducing growth in the NDIS, reducing growth, not cutting it, reducing growth to 8% annual. That's hardly an objective which undermines the system. We want a system that has integrity, that has sustainability, because unless it has that, it will be undermined in the future. So that's just one example of the work that we have done. But in addition to that, I can assure you that in our Treasurer and Finance Minister, to give credit where credit's due, when we've sat around in difficult budgets and aiming to deliver a surplus, every time issues like rental assistance or provision of support for people who are vulnerable, every time that has been absolutely at the forefront of what Jim and Katie always advocate. And in particular, you know, I'm so proud of what we did to take Ann Summers' report on single parenting payments. That's something that, you know, was very dear to me. That was something that was a mistake made by a former Labor government. We fixed it.
Josh Butler.
Prime Minister, thanks for your speech. Josh Butler from The Guardian. A moment ago you spoke about the Indigenous voice referendum. Obviously it was unsuccessful, but the question of constitutional recognition for Indigenous Australians still remains unresolved. You spoke about the Liberal leaders who have backed this idea. Peter Dutton obviously at one point spoke about symbolic recognition through the campaign. We know your point of view on this. My question to you is what now? There obviously, maybe Australians don't have an appetite for another referendum anytime soon, but would you, your future government or another government set up some sort of process like the Referendum Council to chart a course for what is next on this thorny issue?
Well, we respect the outcome of the referendum. Wasn't what we sought, but we respect the decision of the Australian people. Peter Dutton has said, you will note, you know, there's always these statements and then they're never spoken about again, but he committed to a referendum in the next term. That's his commitment that he made during the referendum. And I'm sure there's some people who thought, oh, well, I can vote no because I'll get another crack at a different option during the next term if Peter Dutton is the Prime Minister. What we are concentrating on is closing the gap, is what are the practical measures that we can make, particularly about economic empowerment. I went to Gama in the end of second half of last year and outlined what was the focus of our agenda. So if you look at practical measures we're taking, including our housing, record funding for remote housing. We understand that's a major issue. The health funding that we're doing through dialysis and other measures as well in Central Australia, our $250 million Central Australia plan that goes to a range of issues of providing that community support. Our schools agreement with the Northern Territory is so important to lift up opportunity there. We're engaging across all the portfolios with Malarndirri McCarthy obviously as the lead, but that's our focus. Was very much outlined in my Garma speech of a way forward, and we'll continue to engage, including with Pat Turner and others as well.
But no move on recognition in a second term?
Well, we're not planning to do we will not be holding a referendum in our second term on any issues. I think that, as much as referendums are hard to win in this country, and we've seen, I think that all it takes is opposition. And people speak about. I'm amazed. I thank members of the media for not asking me the date of the election, but Australians have voted twice, not once, twice, against 4-year terms. Like a pretty simple proposition. Why do you want more elections every 3 years rather than 4? Every state and territory government's done it. The world hasn't ended. It's actually more stable. It's sensible. But guess what? If people have an opportunity as an opposition to just say no, then they do. So I'm focused on practical outcomes and making a difference. That'll be my focus next term. Thank you.
Dana Daniel.
Dana Daniel from the Canberra Times. Thank you for your speech, Prime Minister. You've made some big announcements in Western Australia, New South Wales and Queensland. Like a lot of safe seats, voters here in Canberra can feel a bit neglected. We've got probably the most outdated stadium in the country, no convention centre worthy of a national capital, and a real sense of being either punished by the coalition or taken for granted by Labor. Do you have any plans to chip in for the new stadium, convention centre, the Canberra Theatre Precinct, the Commonwealth Park pool or the Sydney to Canberra rail line?
Always back self-interest, it's trying, as Keating said. Well, I don't want to go through the list of what is now my local community here. Is a fantastic place to live. I'll make that point. But we have put $500 million into our national institutions just down the road here. We had a national art gallery that has a single piece of art, thanks to Gough Whitlam, worth $500 million that has buckets on the floor because the roof is leaking, and the same venue that has blue poles. The National Museum, the National Portrait Gallery, all of these national institutions. The National Archives had our precious history essentially going to dust because there was no proper funding of it. The Australian Institute of Sport, where every Australian wants to go and cheer when our Olympians or Commonwealth Games competitors are competing in the green and gold, was massively underfunded, was falling apart because money hadn't been put in. That's before you get to the light rail line here and other infrastructure, including the wonderful environment here around the Murrumbidgee River that has been funded as well. So we think the national capital, I firmly think the national capital and our national institutions matter. I am, some people who've watched me for a while have said, you're a conservative when it comes to national institutions and those things. I love the Parliament. I think that the Prime Minister should live in Canberra. Call me old-fashioned. The Prime Minister's residence is the Lodge, not Kirribilli House. And hence, I think since I've been Prime Minister, urged on by Andrew here and Alicia and Dave, but most importantly, because I'm more scared of her than the other three, is Katie Gallagher. And it's pretty handy having a finance minister from Canberra. I'll just make that point.
Prime Minister, we're starting to run out of time. Are you happy to take a few more questions?
Sure.
Thank you. So I think we've got one from James Riley.
Thanks, Prime Minister. I'm James Riley from Innovation Oz. I wanted to ask you about artificial intelligence and productivity, an area where the US is making some big bets. One of the first announcements by President Trump was about the private sector investing $500 billion US to build AI data centres across the US. Overnight, he signed an order for an AI action plan to secure energy and infrastructure to maintain that AI dominance in the US. So my question is, what do you think that means for Australia in terms of competing on AI and building our own capability? What is the Australian government doing to support digital infrastructure like data centres and ensuring that we have the energy to power them?
Well, thank you for the question. Ed Husick is leading our work when it comes to artificial intelligence and making sure that we can take advantage of the opportunities that will arise from it, whilst understanding some of the risks that are there as well from artificial intelligence. When it comes to our capacity to engage in the new economy, which includes AI and new technologies, we will need more energy, which is why Australia has potentially, and there have been significant investments from companies like Microsoft here in Australia, something I announced in Washington, DC, when I was there for my state visit. The idea that Australia will need 40% less energy than what the Australian Energy Market Operator says will be required essentially says not just, you know, our aluminium and steel industry being offshored, but it also means no capacity to deal with things like data centres and new technologies that will require significant energy resources. And the other things that these data centres will look for, because they're global industries, is their carbon footprint. So I'll be looking for opportunities for green energy in particular. And that is a significant advantage that we have. That's why the work that Chris Bowen is leading is so important for Australia, for not just traditional manufacturing, making things, but also these new industries that will employ tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands over a period of time. I mean, we made a commitment at the last election for 1.2 million jobs in tech, essentially going forward with the Tech Council. This is a huge opportunity, and I've been a part of discussions with significant corporate interests about investing here because of the opportunities here with green energy, the advantage that we have, comparative advantage in our legal security, if you like, our political stability, and where we're located in the world as well. Just to our north, fastest growing region in the world in human history. There's nowhere you would rather be than right here. So whether it's these issues or the Quantum issue that we're dealing with in Queensland, these are opportunities for Australia, and my government wants to seize them.
Peter Hobson.
Thank you. Peter Hobson from Reuters. Thanks, Prime Minister. I wanted to ask what you think of President Trump's decision to pull out of the Paris Agreement on climate change, and what implications that might have for Australia and for the wider Pacific.
Well, I don't think it came as a surprise, and he leads a sovereign nation, and Australia's a sovereign nation as well. And we obviously will not be doing that. And we see that there is a challenge of dealing with climate change, but we also see it as a massive opportunity. And we intend to seize that opportunity and potentially, of course. There are in a range of areas as well, first mover advantage. We'll wait and see what the implications are for where capital flows. But I say as well that many of the issues that have been established in the US, such as through the Inflation Reduction Act, we'll wait and see what the implications are for their domestic politics, if you like, because that has resulted in a flow of capital being focused on the United States because of the advantages that they have. Now, we have engaged in investment and attempts to attract capital here. Part of the announcement we've made just this week on green aluminium is a major one. We're working on steel, batteries. All of these issues are ones in which Australia has potential opportunity. We'll await what the implications are for the United States based upon what they do domestically. But if you're talking about jobs, there's a lot of jobs involved in the transition to net zero.
Our last question, just because we're being beaten by time, will be Anthony Galloway.
Anthony Galloway from Capital Brief. Thank you, Prime Minister. The average Australian listening to your answer to Jeff's question may be forgiven for thinking that you have no regrets as PM or you wouldn't have done a single thing differently. So my question is, over the last 2.5 years as PM, would have you done anything differently? What's your biggest regret?
Well, of course, any Prime Minister can do things in a way that are perfect, perhaps. And, you know, I have a view that if you look at the media every morning, I don't feel the need to give myself a character assessment on a daily basis, because I receive it in some ways very predictably every day. And I look at the headlines and, you know, you go through that. But what we do each and every day is do our best. Do our best. No government's perfect. We do our best, but we're focused. And one of the things I will say is this. There is no day in which we say, OK, what's our personal interest here rather than the national interest? Every single day we focus on the national interest and dealing with things that come at us. Global inflation came at us. That's just a fact. But would I, in 2022, when I was standing here, at that time, inflation in the March 2022 quarter was 2.1%. Today, inflation has a 2 in front of it. Unemployment is at 4. We have real wages increasing 4 quarters in a row. We have avoided, unlike so many of our competitors in the industrialised world, we have avoided recession and haven't had a single quarter of negative growth. And we've done all of that while producing 2 budget surpluses and making sure that we've continued to have our focus, our eye on that horizon of strengthening Medicare, of giving people educational opportunity, of increasing gender equity that we regard as important, dealing with climate change, repairing our relationship with our Pacific neighbours, where we were frankly in the naughty corner for a long period of time with our closest neighbours, and with ASEAN as well to our north, repairing the relationship with China so that jobs are being created through more than $20 billion of exports. I'm happy to stand in support of the record that we have, but also to say that that's not enough. That's not how you win a second term. You win a second term through also what's the offer for the second term. And we've already outlined making free TAFE permanent, a 20% reduction in student debt, cheaper childcare, making the 3-day childcare guarantee, childcare infrastructure investment, the announcements we've made today about schools, something that I haven't seen a drumbeat out there in the media saying what's happening with Gonski. You know, people sort of put it in the too hard basket. We've got on and done it. And, you know, I'm confident that we'll continue to talk with the 2 outstanding states. These are the things that drive me to make a difference each and every day. Not self-analysis, I get enough of that from you fine people, and that will continue, and that's your job. I respect all of that. My job is to get on with building a better Australia. That's what I intend to do.
Please join me.
Now, this year's card